Hey guys, Creator here. Going to talk about the Depthmap system, do a bit of a tutorial, explain how it works, and show you how to make depth maps for tiles in Project Zomboid Build 42. So, to jump right in, what is a depth map? What the hell are we talking about here? With Build 42, there was a system added that allows 2D tiles to have 3D space, basically, or 3D geometry applied to them. And this is done through depth maps. These maps apply to to each tile or to the tiles that need them, and they give the object depth in a 3D environment, which is what the game is now. Oh, we have one of the stories spawn here. That's always fun. All right. Anyways, so to demonstrate, normally in like build 41, all of these tiles, all of the map tiles would be in a state where if you were near them or you cross by them, you would either be in front or behind them. With depth maps, that is not the case. So you can actually be partially within this thing. You can see it intersecting with my midsection here, all the way through this. And you can see as I hit the wall, I'm also partially in the wall. There's no point of no return where I am suddenly behind or in front of the sprite. It's a full blend as if it's a 3D object. That's the gist of what we're talking about today. So that's a basic overview of what the system is. It's very valuable because previously a lot of players would, if you're an older player that's played on Build 41, then you have probably gotten used to it. I know for sure that I had, even though I would subtly notice the issue, it would not really be a main concern of mine. I just knew it was sort of a quirk of the way that the engine worked, and there was nothing that could really be done about it. But that's no longer the case. So now that we have the system, it's important that we make sure that modded tiles and vanilla tiles and all of that are implemented properly in it. And that's what this tutorial will hopefully help with. So we can try and get started on that and get a head start on porting everything over. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and set up some project files, just some preliminary stuff here. I'm going to show on screen the files and the directories of the mod that I'm using. And this is just a test mod that I put together, but it's basically the same format that you would find in any of the existing Build 41 Tileset mods that people have published. So you have your, you have all of the basic stuff that you'd have from Build 41, but you also have 3 new things in here. And this is the Depth Maps folder, which is empty. And then you have 2 new text files. These are important. So you need to make sure that your mod has that empty depth maps folder, and then you need to make these 2 empty text files. And you can just make them like any other text file. Just right click, create new. And they can be totally blank. As long as you have that, you're good to go. But the game needs those 3 things in your mod to recognize it as a mod that actually has depth map data and geometry data that we can use in the editor. All right, so with that out of the way, we are going to go back in game here, and we are going to look at the editor. And the way you pull that up is you have to be in debug mode, obviously, and then Shift F8. And that will bring us to this menu. You'll see we get a nice half-clothed man here, mostly unclothed, actually. And we can use these handles to move him around if we need to in 3D space. And he is going to be our reference point. So since 2D objects don't have a 3D reference, and we need to be able to sort of test the effects that our modifications have, we're going to need him as a reference, as a 3D object. So he will be very useful. Do not move him too far. You want to keep him around. So we'll get right into the UI. So at the top here, we have this drop down. This is going to be important. Right now it says game. This is the vanilla game. If you click on this, you will also have your mod in this drop down. If you did the previous step correctly, if you have the new files in place, the Depthmap folder and the 2 text files, then this will show up with your mod name, and we can select that. Now, what this does is it changes the data space that we're in. So, if you, for instance, make changes to any of the tiles, if you make any depth map changes, any assignment changes, and then you click the save button, it's going to save to whatever you have set up here. So if we have the mod selected, it's going to save to those files that we just created. If it's the vanilla game, it'll actually save to the vanilla game files. And those changes will exist in your vanilla game file. So something to keep in mind is that you might want to keep a backup, or at least be careful with what you're doing. Keep track of what you're doing, because if you overwrite that, it's going to actually change your game fundamentally. So if you mess something up, it's going to be pretty much permanent. But what you can do is, if you run into that scenario, if you didn't make backups, then you can delete the files that we just created from the vanilla game. So if you go into the vanilla game, same structure, same file names, you can delete those and then verify your Steam files. So if you go on Steam, properties, verify your game files, then it will re-download those files. If that doesn't work, then you'll have to reinstall your game, unfortunately, to get those files back. So, but that should work. The verifying your game files, as long as you delete the originals, then that should work to get the vanilla data back. But most of the time, we're going to be trying to save within our tutorial mod here. And, for you, it would be whatever your mod name is. That'll show up there. So, all right. In the same space, we have this dropdown. This is the mode that we're in this menu. This is actually used for several things. So, the other one mainly is seating. There's a tutorial on the unofficial mapping Discord that someone made for setting the seating up. I'm not going to be going over that today with that tutorial existing already. I think it does a pretty decent job. But depth maps and seating kind of go hand in hand, because without depth maps, your character sitting on furniture is going to look a little odd in some circumstances. So that's why they sort of paired these together, I believe. The third one is the other tiles mode. This is so you can actually test what certain tiles look like in adjacent to each other. And we might use this later on to show a few things, but for the most part, I'll get into how you can place tiles in here, and I'll show you that in just a bit. So, all right, moving on. We have these 2 drop downs here. These correspond to these large black areas in the UI. This is where you choose your tile sets. So you have to scroll down through these vanilla ones. There's quite a bit of filler data, either from older stuff or from like generated tiles, but eventually you'll reach ones that probably look familiar to you if you're a mapper or a tile set maker. And if you pull one up, you can see that we have what you would expect. This is the Appliances Cooking 01 tile set from the vanilla game. Now, as you can see, the backgrounds on these are all black, except for the ones that are red, which just means there's no data there at all. But the ones that do have actual tile data have a black background. If we go and change this to our vanilla game, instead of the mod, you'll see that these turn blue. And that is because they actually have data assigned to them. Depth map data, I should say, geometry data. These have geometry data and depth map data, to be precise. So the difference here is that whenever you have your mod loaded, it actually doesn't load the vanilla data. And that's kind of what you would want or expect, because otherwise everything that's loaded, every mod that's loaded would have overlapping data, and you wouldn't be able to tell where it's coming from. So just keep that in mind, that if you're trying to look at vanilla geometry or depth map data, if it's not showing up, it's probably because you have your mod selected. So to actually view the data, you have to be in the vanilla game. If you're in the mod and you click one of these, this is what a dataless, depth mapless, geometry-less tile looks like. Just a normal tile with no data. So it just brings up the tile itself. Pretty standard. If we instead look at the vanilla version that does have the data, you will see that this is what we get. So brief explanation of what all this is the white boxes, this wireframe, is our geometry. So this is what we'll be mainly working with in this editor. This is what actually defines what we're editing, pretty much. So the game doesn't actually read geometry data in terms of what it displays to the player during gameplay. It uses the depth map, which is this over here, this actual image. This is the depth map for this tile, and you can see it's actually overlaid on the sprite itself as well. So that's what the game actually sees when it's trying to calculate the depth and use the depth buffer to actually draw the interaction with the 3D objects. And you can see that now that we have this data, our player character does interact with it how you would expect in 3D space. So moving on, we have that's the basics of the data that we're going to be looking at. And then we have a lot of ways we can manipulate this and control the way that this is displayed. So let's get into that. Mainly on the left here, we're going to have this list, which is our list of objects in the scene right now. So we have our player. This will always be there. There's no way to get rid of him. And you wouldn't want to. He's pretty useful, pretty important. Then we have the boxes, which make up our geometry. So these boxes are just individual objects that exist in 3D space, and we can move these around using these handles. And the importance of these is that it's what actually is used to calculate this depth map. So a lot of people, even myself, when we were first finding out about the depth maps and seeing them in the game files, were like, what did they use to make these? What kind of process? Did they manually paint these by hand? Did they use Photoshop or something to select different faces and then put gradients on it? But no, this is actually how this is made, is using this 3D data. So this is a representation in 3D space that's used to make a 2D texture that is used to make the 3D representation of the object in space. A little bit complicated, but it's kind of straightforward once you get it. So next up, we have some of these buttons here, and these do various things. So we have the translate button, which is actually a toggle between translate, which is what it's on right now, and rotate. So you can actually rotate these in 3D space as well, which can be quite useful, especially for more complex shapes. We'll be using that later on. You can also do hide geometry, which will just show you the tile itself. And this will allow you to sort of preview what you're getting in terms of the interactions without a lot of the other noise going on. So with this, we've got we can just toggle that on and off, and then we have all of these add buttons. So these will actually add new geometry objects to the list. These three we will go over later because they are a little more complicated, but the main one, your bread and butter, is going to be the box. If you just add one, you can see I've got a brand new box here. It's pretty big. And I'll get into how we can scale this and manipulate this in just a bit. But we've also got the cylinder. So we've got a cylindrical shape. And this is very useful for certain shapes that don't really fit a box or, hard angles. So we have a few options here. There's also an edit points button, which corresponds to these three. So we'll get into that later. And then remove selected is just a delete button, basically, for whatever you have selected in this list. And then moving on, we have the depth map itself, obviously. We have some properties down here that we'll get into in a little bit. And then on the right side here, we have this actually our size, the size of the object. So if I add a new box here, you can see that as I select these, it's giving me one axis to manipulate, and there's two different ones, and these are the minimum and the maximum, pretty much, of the extents of the object. So, and you can see as I go down to these two right here, it swaps to this y-axis here, the green one, and then you've got the z-axis, which is the blue one here, on the third. So, and what these do is just give you handles to resize the object completely. So, and you can use these to make any shape of box that you want, pretty much. So, and then if you click anywhere, it will anywhere but one of these, then it will go back to the regular moving handles that you can use. So, very useful. We'll be using that quite a bit for actually building brand new geometry. Additionally, down here we have these. You can see it's moving the camera. These are our perspectives. So this is the main one, the isometric view. And then we've got two side views, top, bottom, front, back. So this sort of allows us to see every angle. This is especially useful for lighting things up and seeing their alignment, because you can't always tell from the isometric perspective what you're actually looking at, basically, or where this is in 3D space. This could be way behind the object. It could be totally misaligned with the surrounding geometry, but this allows us to sort of, like if we go to the side here, I can take this axis here, and we can actually size it so it's exactly the same size as the other object. And make sure that all of our axes are aligned in this way, which is incredibly valuable, and you'll see why as we get into making the actual depth maps. So, let me go ahead and remove that box for now, and we will take a look at this sidebar a little bit more in depth before we get into sort of the meat of things. So, this is the same list as over here. These are just all of the tile sets in the game. This will also include all of the modded tile sets, regardless of whether you have game or depth map, your mod selected. It will show the full list of these no matter what. So you always have the vanilla data, and you always have the modded tile sets. For this tutorial, I have loaded in Mellow or Milo's tiles. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I usually go with Mellow, I think, in my head, but if that's incorrect, sorry. So you can actually type in these as well, and you can see that I have his tiles loaded here. So And he's graciously allowed me to use these to demonstrate, because I have some specific ones that I want to try out later on in terms of actually making depth maps for these. So you can see that even in vanilla, his tiles do not have any data currently, because his is a build 41 pack that hasn't been updated yet. So we will be taking a look at how we can add some data to some of these in just a little while. So to get into a little bit more of the features of these panels, is we have a bunch of right-click options. So if you right-click on these, first option we have is swap tile sets. This will just swap the list between each other. It's important to note that the right and the left they have distinct functions. So if we right-click on this, we're going to get a different list of functions than what we have over here. And this is important because this is sort of our reference over here. This is for, copying and modifying data on the left, and this is actually for like selecting what we want to edit. So they kind of work in tandem with each other, especially when manipulating and copying the data back and forth. So, and we'll show that in this menu here. So there's options to clear the depth of the selected tile, which will get rid of the depth map. There is the clear assigned depth textures. What this does is, if we don't have geometry, but we have depth data assigned from another tile, this will clear that assignment. And there's none in this list. So let me see. I think bathroom fixtures has, yeah, some down here. So with these, you can see these have geometry data, the blue ones, which is just like what we were looking at. But these gray ones don't have any, but they still have a depth map assigned. And that's because they have it assigned from another tile. In this case, this one, most likely this tile up here. Since this one has actual geometry and this one doesn't, you can see it's gray in the background. This has assigned data, but not geometry data. So that's what that right click will actually clear with this, the assigned depth textures. So that will clear the assignment completely. We're going to go back to the appliances 01 here. Cooking. Appliances cooking 01. And then I'm going to show you if you have cleared the data using this option here, you can actually get it back. And I'll show you how to do that in a bit when we get into actually how we get the data to turn into a depth map. But we will be getting that back, so do not fret. So what we've got next is rotate 90 degrees around Y. This will rotate the actual geometry of the object. So you can see it just rotated this 90 degrees. This is useful for variants. So if we've got like this one here, we could have taken this, copied it to this tile, to this variant, and then rotated it to this orientation, which would actually give us this result, pretty much. So, and there's sometimes, because it rotates around the center, you might have to actually move the geometry. You can see that there is, in this vanilla tile, actually some movement that occurred, so you might have to offset those a little bit. But the rotation at least allows you to not have to remake every single piece of geometry in the scene. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate that a few more times just to get us back to where we were before. Right here. Yep. And then we have select in other list. What this will do is, if you want to get the other list to match whatever you have selected right now, you can do that, and it will bring this up as well. And this is actually very useful because there are functions that we'll get into in just a second that require the use of both Tileset panels. So the last one on the list is shift geometry. This is mainly used for multi-tiles. So if we do shift geometry north, it'll shift this entire thing one tile to the north. And we will get into that a bit with the multi-tiles that we're going to be making. So sometimes you won't need that, but it's there if you do. So moving on, we've got on the left side, we have similar options, so we can swap the tile sets just like before. We can clear the assignments, and we can select another list. So pretty much the same there, except if you have data selected here that has, let's see, like if we have this data, we can actually use this to copy into this. So if we have this selected, which has geometry, and we right-click this, we can do copy geometry from right. This will copy the geometry from this tile into this tile. So you can see now we have this this geometry from this tile in this tile, this tile right here. So that's how you copy those over. If you want to instead assign a depth map to one of these, then you can select whatever source tile you want, and then to copy it, you just hold left click on one of these until that little blue thing fills all the way up. So it gives you a little timer so you don't accidentally replace things, but once it completes there, once you just hold left click long enough for that to complete, like so, it'll give you that gray background saying that it has depth map data now. And you can see that the geometry data is still there, but it's showing as gray because it's still taking the depth map from another tile. So even though we have our geometry here, it's not actually going to use it because we have this assigned from this tile. Which obviously we don't want that because this is the wrong shape for what we have. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that. All right, and then I'm going to rotate this back to how it was. Just so we're back in the groove here. So there are a few other right-click options for double tiles, I believe. Yeah, so like for this one, subtract sprite grid pixels. This one is one that I haven't quite figured out yet. But basically what I think it means is that if you have pixels in another tile, say like we can see here, it will actually subtract any pixels from this that overlap with your main tile that's selected. And there's not a lot of times when even the vanilla game uses this. I don't think it doesn't really use this method, but it's there if you need it. If you're having trouble with some multi-tiles and you're not able to figure it out, then that might be able to help you. But so far I haven't really experimented with that a ton. So feel free to. But I wouldn't worry about it too much otherwise. And that's pretty much all the functions in here. Yeah. So that's the gist of it. So now let's take a look at what we actually do to make the depth map. So if we have a tile with geometry, like we do here, if you want to actually bake the tile map from this geometry, then all you have to do is you have one of the pieces of geometry selected, basically anything but the player selected, and you can click and drag. It'll give you this nice selection box. And you want to make sure you have every piece of this within this box. Every pixel of your sprite. If you don't, it's going to give you a partial depth map, which you do not want pretty much in any circumstance, I don't think. So there may be some edge cases where you do, but this is probably not what you want pretty much ever. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that. We're just going to redo that. And you can see it has drawn the depth map from the geometry data. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. In addition, there are some features for removing data from these. So if you wanted to control left click drag, you can actually just erase parts of this as well. There's not a lot of scenarios where I think you would want to do that, but it's there if you need it. So, as you can see with this, there's actually some floating extra pixels here. A lot of vanilla tiles have this issue, where these are actually not even fully opaque. They are slightly transparent. And we are going to keep those in there for now because a lot of the vanilla depth maps actually do keep that data for now. Whether they will always, we'll have to see, but as you can see, a lot of these extra pixels are still in there. So for now, I would say do the whole thing, and we can kind of experiment with that. But I would say better safe than sorry for now, because if you don't have the pixels selected and you have that extra data, then it's a little odd in terms of what the game does with those pixels. So just something to keep in mind. So we have our depth map. It's baked. It's cooked. We can press save, and now it's in the game. I'm in vanilla. We basically didn't edit this at all, so I just saved it again just to make sure. But if you are in your mod, you will actually have to make sure that you save it before the depth map will actually show up, because there's no image in your depth maps folder that actually corresponds to this tile set until you press save. So it actually has to generate that image, even if it's just blank. If you don't have any data, if you press save, it's going to save whatever tile set you have selected as a PNG to that folder that we made. So, and that's where your actual depth map data gets sent. So let's move on. We will take a look at, let's see, what do we want to do next? I guess we can look at actually building some geometry. So let me pull up one of Melos's tiles. We'll just do his, and actually we'll make sure we do it on the right tile set here. Maybe his was appliances 01 actually. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So this is one of his stove tiles. We will make a depth map for this, and we'll do that by making some geometry. So we're going to go ahead and add a box to start us off, and then we will go up here to the sizing, and we're going to move this down here to about right there. Try and get it close to the edge there. Try and get these, refine these edges a little bit. They're already pretty good shape, but go ahead and do that. Do this for each axis until we get a result that we like. And there we go. And you want to make sure that when you're doing this that you don't have any pixels that lie outside of the geometry itself, because if we do that, you'll be able to see this over here. It actually just doesn't have, certain tiles in there, or certain pixels in that area. So I'm going to go ahead and save just so it generates that fully. But yeah, so yeah, you want to make sure you have all of the pixels within here, because it gets a little wonky if you don't have that. There's also something to note is that if we don't have any geometry here and we try to, or actually we would have to have some geometry, but I can move this up so it's out of the way. If we just try to draw this without blank geometry, we're actually going to get this little box here. And what this is I believe, as far as I understand it, that based on the tile properties, that are actually defined in the tile set, you will get a preset basically, and this is sort of the base preset for this shape of furniture object. So this is what we get pretty much. This is the base shape, but you can see we're missing a lot of data up here on top. So you would not want to use that. You would want to build actual geometry for this. There are certain shapes that if they were maybe smaller than this, or if they were, if they matched perfectly the size of this preset, you could actually just use the preset. But I would suggest in most scenarios to actually build a proper data for it. So I'm just going to restart here with the boxes, and we'll do this again. Just very quickly. I'm going to outline this. And do our z-axis. Actually raise that height back up a bit so we get these pixels up here. All right, that should do, I think. And then we will go ahead and add another box. And this time we're going to scale this down quite a bit to this back section. Oh, whoops. All right, that should be decent. And that should be pretty close to what we had with the vanilla one. So I'm going to go ahead and draw our box around this so we cook the depth map, and you can see we have it here. So pretty straightforward. I'm going to swap the tile set just so we can kind of compare. We take a look at the vanilla data. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty close, I would say. So, go ahead and swap back here to our mod. Yeah, yep, pretty close. So, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now that is pretty much complete. For a basic tile like that, that's all you got to do. This one's done. Obviously, we have these other ones here, these other directions. So what we're going to do is we're going to select another list. This will give us, our duplicate list here. And then we are going to keep this selected, this one that we just made. And then from here, we're going to go to the left panel, and we're going to right-click and do copy geometry from right. And we're going to do that for all three of these. And then if we actually select these now, these ones that we just copied to, you'll see we have that geometry we just made. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on this and do rotate 90 degrees. You can see we have this. Just like I showed you with the little bit of offset that the vanilla ones have, we're going to have to give this a bit of offset as well. So we're just going to move this geometry so that we have all the pixels inside. Do the same with this. And that should be good. And then we'll go ahead and draw this as well. There we go. Save that. And you don't have to save every time. I think whenever you save, it'll save all the data that's currently in. I just kind of do that out of habit, I guess. We're going to do the next one. I'm going to rotate this twice. Go ahead and move these into place. This one we have to move on this axis a little bit. But the shape is generally the same, so it'll save us time. A little bit of work here to do, but not too bad. And if your tile's a little more centered than these are, because these are based on vanilla tiles, and the vanilla tiles are not quite centered. And really they shouldn't be because the way they sit on the tile to make like countertops and stuff work. Um, but if your tiles are a little more centered than these, then you'll have an easier time basically um, with these because you won't have to adjust as much whenever you rotate these. So we've got this one done. And you can see as we're adding these, they get the blue data because they both have geometry and they're pulling the depth map from their actual geometry that they have. And we'll go ahead and do the same for this. We will rotate 3 times this time. Go ahead and move this a little bit. Right there should do. And there we go. Cool. And we're good to go. All right, so there's a full set right there. Now we can actually see that in his tile set we've got reskins, and this is actually going to be really easy to do. So what we'll do is we'll select. I wonder if we can do multiple at once. Oh, we can. Perfect. So what I did is I just shift click here, and we can pick multiple. I think you can also control click to deselect and select individual ones, but we're going to have all 4 of these selected. We're going to go over here, and we're going to hold left click, and we're just going to assign these. And we're going to do this to all the reskins. And I'm going to double check, since these have a different shape on the top, see if they are... Yeah, see, this one's a little bit different, so we're actually going to have to... this will require a different depth map, because we have these pointed edges on the top mainly is the reason. They're generally the same shape, though, so what I'm going to do is we're going to copy the geometry to these. So copy from right, and we have this. And since it's basically the same shape, we're pretty much already done. I'm going to increase the size of this top thing a little bit, just to make sure we get that last row of pixels there. But yeah, and then we're going to do that. And we have that one done. And then we're going to do this where we do our copy geometry from right. Or actually, sorry, I need to have this selected and then copy geometry from right. There we go. I'm going to do that for all 4 of these. So now we have our data. We're going to rotate. Going to do our movement. Do that for all of these. That should be good enough. Okay. And there we go. So now we've got this set done. We can do its reskins as well. So I'm going to shift select these, and we'll go ahead and do the reskins for this shape. And you can see now we've got these gray backgrounds. These are all assigned. If we go in and take a look at one of them, it's going to have the exact same depth map as this. Same for these. They will all have their corresponding depth maps all the way down. And actually, I'm seeing that we messed that one up a little bit, maybe. These might actually not be identical. That could be the issue. Let me see. Yeah, these are looking to be maybe a little different on these. Yeah, these are a little offset. That just might be an issue with the Tileset. So yeah, if these were the same offset, then this would be fine. But that might be something. I think if I was working on this tile pack, actually, then I would probably just go in and change the offset to be the same as these, so that this assignment works. But otherwise, you could just remake this by copying the geometry over and then shifting it, and you could just redraw it that way instead. Either way you want to do it is fine, but yeah, I would just personally I would just shift this so that they're on the same dimensions as this, pretty much. So that is how we do a basic set of furniture, but this applies to pretty much anything. So every object in the game is pretty much going to be the same process. So let's get into some of the let's go over these properties here now. Surface property you might be familiar with. This is something that's existed in the game for a little bit, I believe. But it was previously only in the tile properties, I believe. So now it's assigned here, sort of, or at least there's an editor for it here. But if you click on this, it'll actually give you a y-axis handle to move this green tile around. And the best way to move this is actually in the side views, because this will allow you to see where it lines up with your geometry. So since this line right here is where our actual surface is in terms of the depth map, you're going to want to make sure that lines up with your surface. And since it's on a grid, it's kind of going to snap like this. So you can either put it a little bit below or a little bit above. I like to do it a bit above, because if this is lower, then any objects you place on this with this surface property are actually going to rest on this line. So if we have it down here, let's say we have like a kettle that we're setting on the stove, half of the kettle is going to be within this surface, and it's going to look like it's merged into it, like it's sinking into the stove. So you want to make sure you have that lined up above your surfaces, or as close as you can get lined up with it, pretty much. You also have the item height property. This one is a little more complicated. I have not been able to figure out exactly the way it works, but more or less, sometimes you have surface property, and other times you have this, but sometimes you also have both. If you just have one thing, I would make sure it's the surface property. This is the baseline for everything, because otherwise, if you have this at 0, which is the default, all your items are going to rest on the ground. So anything you place, like a kettle or whatever, is going to be inside the stove if you don't have this set properly. If this is set to 0, everything's going to sit on the ground. Item height I've mostly seen used in tandem with surface for things that sort of sit on counters or objects that sit on top of other objects. So for instance, if we take a look at, if I go to the vanilla game, I think Cooking 01 should have a microwave. Yeah. And then you can see there's 2 whenever I hover over these. The top one is the item height. So you can see it lines up with the top of the microwave. Why this is, not really sure. I think it has to do with there's a situation in the game where you can place objects on either one surface or the other surface, and I think it might have something to do with that, because it'll let you switch, I think using the tab key, which surface you're placing the object on. I think this has something to do with that, but I've also seen situations where the surface and the item height have been the same, or it just uses the item height for like a shelf or something, so it's very odd, and they seem to behave in sort of the same way when you use them like that, so it's, yeah. I wouldn't pay too much attention to it, but if you have an object that's kind of like on a countertop or on another object that's kind of where it's floating like that, and it has a base surface level of where it's resting, then I would set it up like this. So you have your surface height down here, and the top one will move with it, and then the item height is sort of the extent of the object. So that's just sort of a general rule to follow with that, that I would stick to. So we have that. We have opaque pixels only. What this means is it doesn't really mean what you might think at first, because obviously you might think that it means, we don't use any of the empty space out here, right? We only use what's opaque, what's visible. But this actually means like fully opaque. So if I select this, it's going to use only the pixels that are like 100% opacity. So if we have any of these like side pixels or whatever, it's going to ignore those completely in terms of the depth map. Now, something to note with these 3 checkboxes, and we'll get into the other 2 in a second, but something to note with these is they don't take effect in the editor itself. They only take effect in-game. So you have to test these in-game to actually see what the effect is, which is unfortunate. Hopefully that's changed in the future, but for now, that's what we have. So, yeah, you can check that. These are just simple toggles that will ignore all semi-transparent pixels on the object. In a similar sense, we also have translucent. What this does is it applies the depth map to an object that has transparent or translucent pixels, like these extra pixels over here. But this is more for something like glass, because what this will do is it will apply the alpha layer in terms of whether or not the object is visible, but it won't occlude what's behind it. So it won't hide the object completely. It'll just intersect with it if it intersects, but it won't hide what's behind it. So you're gonna want that for anything that has glass, anything that has semi-transparent pixels, where you want the whatever's behind it to be visible still. Otherwise, it's gonna hide whatever's behind that. So, and we'll show that in a bit, because we're gonna do these ice cream dispensers down here for Melis's tiles. So whenever we do those, you'll see there's some complex glass on there that we'll get into. There's also use object depth texture. What this does is, if you have an overlay, this is basically what they will use. You will want to have this checked for your overlays. And the reason is this makes it so an overlay tile uses the depth map of whatever it's attached to, which is pretty useful, because that means you don't have to do anything. You just have to go in and check this box, and you're pretty much done. For a lot of stuff like wall overlays, for posters that don't have any depth to them, this is probably going to be your bread and butter. This is going to be your easiest option. So this would also be the case for any vegetation, I believe, because you'd want to use the floors depth map. If there's some complex vegetation, or if it's something in like a potted plant, then that would be an exception where you wouldn't want to use this, but typically those aren't going to be overlays anyways. So just whenever you think of this option, think of overlays pretty much. There may be other use cases for that, but that's mainly what I've seen in the game code and in the vanilla tiles. So that is pretty much all the properties. Pretty straightforward. Once you know what they do, at least. So let's take a look at... there's also some options up here. We can take a look at these. These are options for drawing various helpers, basically. The first one, Draw Grid, is going to show you this grid. This is very useful for especially finding the center of the tile, because it gives you this overlap of the Z and X axes. And these will actually show within all of the perspective views as well. And these give you really nice ways to line things up. I don't use the grid a ton, or haven't so far, but you might find it useful. As you can see, it kind of draws over everything, so it doesn't give you a ton of perspective, but it is useful for finding relative positions, pretty much. Next up, we've got Draw Pixel Grid. This is similar to the Photoshop pixel grid, where if you zoom in far enough, you'll actually get a full grid of pixels throughout this entire area. So it's good if you need to count pixels, if you need to see where pixels lie in relation to each other. It's not very useful, but it's there if you need it. Draw Sprite Grid. What this does is nothing for regular tiles, but this determines whether or not it draws the partner tile when you have multi-tile tiles selected. So if I disable this, it'll hide that. So we just have the main tile that's selected. And if I have it selected, then it actually draws it. So same thing with this, the texture mask. The normal texture mask is down here, this option, so we'll go ahead and skip ahead just to show you this. But this shows the actual texture mask. This is all of the pixels in the tile itself. So it just selects, this is a mask of all the pixels, anything that's not empty space, pretty much. There's not a ton of reason you would need that unless you're trying to hunt down maybe some extra pixels on your sprite. So if you're trying to remove some of those floating pixels that occasionally get out there, this is a good way to find those. So back up here to this option, this just does it for the other side, for double tiles. Same thing. So you can have those both on at the same time. It'll show the mask for the whole thing. And you can actually do that without this as well, so you can show sort of the mask there as well. Next up, we've got Draw Solid Square Box. What this does is gives you an opaque 3D box, which is like the entire size of the cell, pretty much. Or the tile, I should say, not the cell. Yeah. And this interacts with the player in 3D space. It's not very useful because it covers up what you're working on, but it's decent if you need a 3D reference for some reason, or if you need to see if there's like overlap into adjacent tiles that you don't want. If you're looking at like down here or on this side. So we also have these two I found pretty useful: Draw North Wall and Draw West Wall. This gives you walls on the back side of the tile. So this is pretty nice because it gives you a bit more perspective, I think, in terms of what you're working on. And it's really nice because it also shows up in these. So like top-down view, it's pretty nice because you can see the sort of corner of the tile, and this gives you also sort of a relative reference of where the other corners are, and also the center. If you think about like the middle of the hypotenuse between these, you can think about where the center is without having the grid enabled. So it's pretty useful for lining things up, I've found. And especially if you want to make sure that something is sort of against a wall in game, or that your geometry is lining up and not intersecting with the walls, then you can use this as well. It's a pretty good measurement of that. So last few here, so we went over that, the texture mask. We've also got the texture outline. This just puts an outline around your entire sprite. Don't know why you'd ever need that, but it's there if you need it. Draw underlying sprite. I've not found a use for that. I haven't looked at the code either. Could be that it's just redundant. Could be that I don't know what it is. But it seems like the underlying sprite that it's talking about would be this, and it's always drawn no matter what. So, actually, I'm thinking maybe that might be for that could be for overlays, but I don't know for sure. Yeah, maybe somebody can experiment with that, but yeah. those are the basic options in the options menu there. So with all of that out of the way, we pretty much have all of the UI covered, I believe, except for the three things that we skipped here. So let me go into those briefly. And actually, I think what we'll do is to demonstrate those, we'll go ahead and get to work on our ice cream stand here. Ice cream holder, whatever this is. Serving station. Yeah, let's go with that. And since this is double tile, I'm going to go ahead and enable the draw sprite grid. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to save this really quick, just so we have, everything here. And then I'm going to go back into game. All right, so I'm back in game here. I've placed down these tiles. Looks pretty normal right now, but if I place this in front of a zombie, you can see he actually just disappears completely behind it. And that's because without a proper depth map, it's actually occluding him, and he's behind this tile completely. Now, since the vanilla game, the tiles behind it actually do have depth map data, it's going to show normally with this transparency. So this is all rendered normally, but again, if we have it like in front of these zombies here, it's going to just occlude them, even though it's got this glass here. And you can also see, while it doesn't affect the player in the same way because we have this semi-transparent kind of view, you can see I should be within it right now. I should be intersecting with it, but I'm actually just completely behind it. And you can see that there is a basic level of depth map that's applied once I get to like the edge here, because it's treating it almost like a wall, I believe. But it's really not giving the effect that it should. So we're going to fix that. We're going to go into the editor again. And we've got this here. We've got our ice cream stand dispenser thing. And it is a double tile, so I've enabled the drawing of the other side as well. We're going to go ahead and build we're going to build some geometry for this. So I'm going to start off with a simple box. And I'm going to click Show Geometry because I had hidden it before. And then we are going to shrink this down. We're going to get this to be about the size of this counter here. And actually, we want it, I think we're going to want this to, let me line up the sides first, actually. Because we're going to want this kind of tight on the edge. I'm going to zoom in here just so we can see what pixels we're getting. Yeah, and then on the X side, we're going to need to do that. And that'll allow us to get this Y a little more accurate. So right about there, because we don't want to exclude this edge up here. And then we're going to take this and we're going to extend the X all the way down to the end, so that we cover both tiles. Because it's going to use the same model for both. I'm going to do this all at once. So we've got that box pretty nice as a base. We're going to go ahead and do the next part, which is going to be, I'm going to show you how to use the planes, which are these three that we didn't talk about yet. So if you add these, you're going to see this is a plane on the X and Y axes. You can add a plane on the X and Z axes and the Y and Z axes. So if we do all three, you can see this one's kind of like a floor. This one's kind of like I guess a north wall. And then this is a west wall, pretty much. And these exist in 3D space, but they are planes. So right now we're only going to need the... And whenever you click these, you can actually also see this is the thing it's sort of attached to, I would say, this blue wall. And then if you look at the other ones, they also have, this is like the floor that it's attached to, and then this is the wall that it's attached to as well. I'm going to go ahead and we're only going to use this one for now, this YZ. I'm going to remove these other two. And we can move this into place here. And to line these up, you're mostly going to want to use the other perspectives. Because it's really hard to tell where these are in 3D space without using this. So I'm going to line this up with the edge of our box that we made. Right there. And then we're going to move this up so it's lined up with the floor, and we'll check that on the other views here. Yep, that's pretty good. We're gonna kind of move this so it's like that, and then what we're gonna do from here is we actually need to get it to this point. So now that we have this lined up, we can actually use isometric view because we already know that it's lined up. So everything is going to be relative to this space that we have, pretty much. So now that we have that, we're going to press Edit Points, and this is where the planes come in handy. This is their main feature because they're not just little boxes or squares. They are fully editable polygons. So we can do a lot of stuff with this. It is very, very neat. What we're going to do in this circumstance is we're actually going to just leave this point kind of where it was. And these are kind of on a grid as well, but you can get overlap with these. So you kind of want to make sure they overlap more than they underlap. But we're actually just going to use this, and we're going to move this up a bit. And we're just going to make sure that this covers as much as we need it to, pretty much. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to, put it right here. And you can see it doesn't match that curve, but it also doesn't need to, because what you'll see is if we go back to our box, just so we have this selected, and then we go ahead and draw the depth map, what you'll see is that it's going to ignore all of that empty space, and it's just going to draw on that curve, because this is the only thing that actually has pixels. So you can see that that's actually working as intended. Yeah, so that's going to be our basic setup there. Now for this part here, this bar that goes across, we're going to need to make that into, I think we'll benefit from having that as actual geometry since it's solid. So we're going to add another box, and we are going to get this shrunken down here quite a bit, and then we will do, I'm actually going to use the top view to line this up a bit, because we'll see this is the, let me get some perspective here. So I'm going to move this so we know this has got to be towards the back. And then we're going to line this up with our existing box. And we're going to need to shrink this down a bit. Go ahead and move this up. Let's see how that's looking. Okay. Now that's supposed to line up, let's see, roughly with the back of that there. So I think maybe our other box is a little big. It's not going to matter a ton because really we're only worried about the pixels that it's going to be drawing for the depth map. But just to make sure we're lining everything up, I'm going to make sure that this is a little tighter because this will let us line up those this in 3D space with reference to this a little better. Because if you see, we've got this like little lip right here. So that's going to be some space that we'll need in relation to the base. So we will need to line that up accordingly. And it looks like we're already kind of there. I'm going to give it a little bit more. And we'll see how this looks in isometric. Yeah, pretty good. We'll make this a little bit bigger just so we get all the pixels. Bigger on the Z-axis here. that should do it. We'll make it, we'll extend it on that side as well. There we go. Okay, that should do. And then we will make sure this covers all the way to the end. Let's get our dude out of the way for a second. And we're going to extend this all the way to the end. And that should do it for that. And then we can do a little test with our depth map drawer. See what this looks like. And yeah, that's looking pretty solid, I think. So it's a good representation. Now, I have tried this once already with this tile in particular. And I attempted to do something a little silly, which is I was going to try to do this glass here. So if I had this geometry, you can see there's this curved glass that goes across the front of this. You don't want to model that. And the main reason is because it's not transparent, or because this is transparent, sorry. Since it's transparent or translucent, since it's see-through, if we do make that geometry in the depth map, there's no way to tell it that that part is actually transparent. So what we need to do is actually just ignore that as if it's not there. And there is a different way, and this will cause some issues, but it'll be better than the alternative. And I'll show you how we can fix those issues later, but for now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to, you might think that if we don't need that part, that this is pretty much done, right? But the issue is that whenever we draw this, we don't want it to ignore that completely. We still need something, otherwise this area right here is going to be totally gone. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if we go back in game here, and what you have to do is the rendering actually doesn't update for these until you place another one down. You can see as I placed another one down, that piece is missing there. So this piece is completely gone because there's no depth data there at all. Which means that probably, I would guess, is the floor behind it is actually rendering in front of the glass. Which is not ideal, obviously. So to fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the editor, and once we're back in here, we're going to need to make another plane. So, and in these cases, these planes could actually be boxes if you wanted them to be. I'm just using planes because I know these are going to be flat edges that we're applying here, that there's no depth to them. So, I find it just a little bit easier with that, to not have to make a really thin box, but you can do it either way. I'm going to add another plane here, though. We're going to do an XY this time. And we're going to move this to the back. We're going to make sure this lines up with the back as well. And it's got to be, is it there where it, because where's our, I guess our box got a little more lined up with that than I thought. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, that's lined up now. I'm going to move this up so the base is there. And then what we're going to do is just make sure this covers the entire back side of this tile. So I'm going to move this up. And again, these don't have to be super accurate because it's only going to do the pixels that exist there. And it might look like as I'm dragging this out that it's going into like other planes potentially, but these planes can only exist on their axes. So we know that for a fact as I'm moving this around, this is only on the X and Y axes. So I'm pretty safe to just eyeball this pretty much. So I'm just gonna way overshoot it and we'll just put it like here. And that's fine. So it's not pretty, but it's good. So we'll go ahead and draw that just to see what it looks like. And what we'll see is we get this. And this is actually exactly what we want. So We don't want this section right here, which is fine because we don't have anything there, because that's going to be taken up by the other tile, and we'll get to that in a sec. But just going to make sure I didn't miss any pixels here. And yeah, okay, we're good. So if we go back into the game, you can see now. Oh, another thing. Let me do this. Translucent is going to be important here, I believe. So if we see what this looks like, if I place it without, you can see that this. Let me see, where is it? There we go. So we still have that issue where the zombies are hidden behind the glass, even though it's transparent. So we need to make sure we have that translucent checkbox there. And I know I'm just spamming these things, but these zombies keep moving. Now you can see it works. Yay! And it works as expected, which is good. So, and you can see if we move into it, we're actually within it. Same if we place objects on it or around it. They will interact as expected now. The only thing is, if I'm standing here, you can kind of see that the translucency is not affecting my head there. Even though, like, here it is. And you can see I can go through that edge, just barely. And you can see the part that's translucent and the part that I'm through. But for this, you would expect that curved piece to also have it. But there's no data there. So that's an issue that can't really be fixed. What would need to happen is, and the way that you would fix this with Melis's tile, if you wanted to, is you could actually split these into two different tiles. So you would have the base where you have the ice cream, right? These little slots, right? You have the base square, and then the thing on top would actually be a separate tile. So you could just cut that into a different tile. As like an overlay or anything like that. So that would be probably the easiest way to fix this issue. And the issue really, you can't see it that well with the player, but if I had one of these zombies like within this, then you would probably be able to see it. And there may be other cases where you'd want to do that more, but I think for now, and honestly in general, I think this is probably fine. Because you're not going to have a lot of scenarios where something is inside of these. You might have something like where you place an object on top of this where it kind of clips through where it shouldn't, but generally I think that's pretty much done for this side of the tile. I'd say we're pretty much finished. Yeah, I like the result that we got there. So this is more of a complex example. And I think whenever... If someone did want to make the curve here, there's a few ways to do it. You could try to use a cylinder, but depending on what's drawn, it might not end up looking the best. But I think cylinder's probably your best bet. Another thing is you could take these planes and actually these can be rotated. So if I do like this, you can see I can rotate these, even though they're just a plane on one axis. They can rotate pretty easily. So. Yeah. So you could take those and you could actually build this glass arch, which would be difficult and a little time consuming, but you could do it. You wouldn't have to have it, too high fidelity. I'd say maybe 5 panels would give you a nice curve there. But yeah, that would be the best way to do it, I think. Other than the cylinder. So given that, we will go ahead and move on. We're going to do the other side now. And since this is a multi-tile and we accounted for the geometry spreading across like that, we should have, let's see. Make sure this is saved. Oh, right, our surface property. Let's do that before we continue. So surface property is just very slightly off from our geometry. I'm just going to move it up to 36 here. Go ahead and save that. And then we will do this, this one. and we're going to select this. We're going to do select another list, so we get our thing here. And then we're going to do, actually, we're going to select this one, sorry. And then right-click on this one and do copy geometry from right. And actually, there is another option here, which is copy geometry from sprite grid. I forgot about this one, but this actually makes it a lot easier because you don't even have to do copy from right. You can just copy it from the sprite grid, which is the other tile that it's attached to. So if it's a multi-tile, it'll have that option. And if we go there, it will have everything without even needing to shift it. So we won't need to move it at all. It's just completely already done for us, pretty much. So I'm going to select one of the boxes so we get our selection here. And then we will draw the depth map. And that is almost done because I actually forgot we do have to do this side here. Now, since we can't rely on the lack of pixels here, because we do have pixels down here, this arch is going to be more complicated. So we're still going to use a YZ plane for this, and we'll move that into position, like so. And we're going to move this up. And we don't really need it down there because we have the box, but I'm going to put it down there anyways, just because why not? And we will do edit points. So since we know we have this lined up now, we can do this. We're going to put this point down here. I'm going to zoom in a bit so we get a better look. And with these polygons, we can actually click on the edge of these to get another point. And we can build complex polygons using this. So I'll go ahead and show you how to make an edge here. So we're just going to make a nice curve. It's not going to be, it's going to be pretty jagged, but the game does a pretty good job. I mean, these depth maps do not need to be like high fidelity or anything. They're approximations of the 3D space, so it's not a huge deal if you get it a little bit off. But yeah, that's our basic curve there. So now, if we redraw this with our depth map, what you'll get is a smooth edge, roughly. Yeah, and that's going to be it. And we're going to set translucent for this as well. And we're going to save it. And we're going to see how it looks in game. And there we go. Pretty normal. We've got this. We got the edge here that you can kind of clip through. And then if we put this in front of some zombies, it should give us the result that we're expecting. As you can see, his arm clipping through there is because of the issue we mentioned before with where you would want to split the tiles, because this arch doesn't have any geometry to it. Yeah, if we added geometry to that side, then it wouldn't look good when we put it next to its partner tile, because it would actually have some extra transparency there, and it would look really ugly. But if you split the tiles up, then it wouldn't have that issue, because like I said, you would be able to model that arch of glass without having to worry about what's underneath it. So it would end up looking a little bit better, but I think this is good enough, honestly. This is pretty much finished for this tile. Obviously, you're not going to have zombies inside of it like that, and that's the only time that issue really occurs. And it's very subtle, even when it does occur. So, yeah, that's the basics. That's well, the basics and everything else, I think. You think about anything we might have missed. We could go through, we could do a lot of other tiles here. These other ones we could do just by rotating the geometry that we made. As we showed with the stoves and stuff, it'd be the same for double tiles. You can just copy the geometry over and then rotate. That would make everything a lot faster. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that's a good good resource for everybody, and it can help people get their tile sets updated. It's going to be a little bit time consuming, but I think it'll be worth it in the long run. Hopefully you guys don't have too much trouble with it. Hopefully it doesn't make you want to pull your hair out. I think it's a pretty neat editor, and it's got a little bit of jank to it, but that's to be expected. It's an in-development tool for an in-development build, and yeah, we'll kind of get used to it over time. It is partially written in Lua, so there might be some modifications we can do to it to make it a little better, but we'll have to see. Yeah. That's about it. If you guys have any questions, I will be on the unofficial Discord, on the unofficial mapping Discord, on the official Zomboid Discord as well. If you need to reach out, you guys can, DM me or whatever. That's all I got. See ya.